Hello, everyone. How are you? It's Jeannie. Welcome to my channel and welcome to a Friday Flip. Make sure you're subscribed. And how about a thumbs up while you're still awake before I bore you to sleep? Today we are going to be reading a few stories, short stories from the Grimm's fairy tales. Now, a lot of these, look at this, a lot of them. The Brothers Grimms lived from about the mid-1700s to about, the almost mid-1800s. I have their dates exactly. They were 1785, 86 to about 1863 and 1859. It was Jacob, and Wilhelm Grimm. And I'll keep this part short, but basically they were very learned. They were going to be lawyers, but they started collecting stories and tales and fables from all around, trying to get all the tales that grandmothers and mothers told their children. And they wanted to get them in writing to preserve them forever, because little villages had stories that were just handed down mother to child and on down that way. And they wanted to preserve these, and so they did that. And the first book they released was Children's and Household Tales, which was their first collection, and it appeared in 1812, and a second volume followed in 1815. Eventually, their collection came to include Cinderella, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Cap, which was Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, Rumpelstiltskin, the Frog King, and the Bremen Town Musicians, the popular ones. Now, a lot of these stories are very dark, and they don't end happily ever after. I'm not going to read those, because I know children listen to this. I will read some of the more uplifting ones, a few of them. Some of them actually, like if you think about Hansel and Gretel, there's cruelty in there. She's going to eat them kids. And, they've been turned out by a wicked stepmother, things like that. So that's just a little bit about the Grimm brothers. They did not write these. They collected them and passed them down, And so we've had these since, the 1800s, early 1800s. Disney has taken several of these things and turned them into what Disney does, and that's okay. But I think it would be good if you, as a parent or an uncle or aunt, grandparent, cousin, whoever reads to children, get the Grimm's fairy tales. Let them, age appropriate, of course, tell them the real stories. Because as I was flipping through here, they are quite fascinating. And even the ones that are hard, kind of like dark, have morals to them. They have lessons to them, evil and nastiness is often punished by fate, or magic, or a king or a queen, and that's why they're fairy tales. But I would maybe invest in something like this that's original, the original works, not the Disney squeaky clean version, but the real version. Allow children to think for themselves. Allow them to come to some intelligent conclusions. Not this wrapped up pretty package of with the bow on it. So, that's just me. Okay. I'm going to start reading this. This does not have any illustrations. There are a few sketchy things here and there. If there's anything interesting, I'll just hold it up and show you. I am not going to put on my overhead camera because there's no point. So, I picked out a couple to read to you, and hopefully you find them relaxing. And we'll start with what are we going to start with? Okay. The Old Man and His Grandson. There once was a very old man whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at the table, he could hardly hold the spoon. He spilt the broth upon the tablecloth or let it run out of his mouth. His son and his son's wife were disgusted at this. So the old grandfather at last had to sit in the corner behind the stove, and they gave him his food in an earthenware bowl, and not even enough of it. And he used to look towards the table with his eyes full of tears. And he used to look towards the table with his eyes full of tears. Once, too, his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. The young wife scolded him, but he said nothing and only sighed. Then they bought him a wooden bowl for a few halfpence, out of which he had to eat. They were once sitting thus when the little grandson of 4 years old, began to gather together some bits of wood upon the ground. "What are you doing there?" asked the father. "I am making a little trough," answered the child, "for father and mother to eat out of when I am big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while and presently began to cry. And then they took the old grandfather to the table, and henceforth always let him eat with them, and likewise said nothing if he did spill a little of anything. I love this because how many elderly does this describe? As they become frail and feeble, they shouldn't be punished for it. What an amazing, amazing ending. I love that. Okay, here's another one. This is called The Poor Miller's Boy and the Cat. The Poor Miller's Boy and the Cat. In a certain mill lived an old miller who had neither wife nor child, and 3 apprentices served under him. As they had been with him several years, he one day said to them, "I am old and want to sit behind the stove. Go out, and whichsoever of you brings me the best horse home, to him I will give the mill, and in return for it he shall take care of me until my death." The third of the boys, however, was the dunce, who was looked on as foolish by the others. They begrudged the mill to him, and afterwards he would not even have it. Then all 3 went out together, and when they came to the village, the 2 said to stupid Hans, "You may just as well stay here. As long as you live, you will never get a horse." Hans, however, went with them, and when it was night they came to a cave in which they lay down to sleep. The 2 smart ones waited until Hans had fallen asleep, and they got up and went away, leaving him where he was. And they thought they had done a very clever thing, but it was certain to turn out ill for them. When the sun rose and Hans woke up, he was lying in a deep cavern. He looked around on every side and exclaimed, "Oh heavens, where am I?" And then he got up and clambered out of the cave. He went into the forest and thought, "Here I am quite alone and deserted. How shall I obtain a horse now?" Whilst he was thus walking full of thought, he met a small tabby cat, which said quite kindly, "Hans, where are you going?" "Alas, you cannot help me." "I well know your desire," said the cat. "You wish to have a beautiful horse. Come with me and be my faithful servant for 7 years long, and then I will give you one more beautiful than any you have seen in your whole life." "Well, this is a strange cat," thought Hans, "but I am determined to see if she is telling the truth." So she took him with her into her enchanted castle, where there were nothing but kittens who were her servants. They leapt nimbly upstairs and downstairs and were merry and happy. In the evening, when they sat down to dinner, 3 of them had to make music. One played the bass viol, the other the fiddle, and the third put the trumpet to his lips and blew out his cheeks as much as he could. When they had dined, the table was carried away, and the cat said, "Now, Hans, come and dance with me." "No," said he, "I won't dance with a pussy cat. I've never done that yet." "Then take him to bed," said she to the cats. So one of them lighted him to his bedroom, one pulled off his shoes, one his stockings, and at last one of them blew out the candle. The next morning they returned and helped him out of his bed. One put on his stockings, one tied his garters, one brought his shoes, and one washed him. One dried his face with her tail. "That feels very soft," said Hans. He, however, had to serve the cat and chop some wood every day, and to do that he had an axe of silver, and the wedge and saw were of silver, and the mallet of copper. So he chopped the wood small, stayed there in the house and had good meat and drink, but never saw anyone but the tabby cat and her servants. Once she said to him, "Go and mow my meadow and dry the grass." And she gave him a scythe of silver and a whetstone of gold, but bade him deliver them up carefully. So Hans went thither and did what he was bidden, And when he had finished the work, he carried the scythe, the whetstone, and hay to the house, and asked if it was not yet time for her to give him his reward. "No," said the cat, "you must first do something more for me of the same kind. There is timber of silver, carpenter's axe, square, and everything that is needful, all of silver. With these build me a small house." Then Hans built the small house and said that he had now done everything, and he still had no horse. Nevertheless, the 7 years had gone by with him as if they were 6 months. The cat asked him if he would like to see her horses. "Yes," said Hans. And then she opened the door of the small house. When she had opened it, there stood 12 horses. Such horses, so bright and shining that his heart rejoiced at the sight of them. And now she gave him to eat and drink, and said, "Go home. I will not give you your horse now, but in 3 days' time I will follow you and bring it." So Hans set out, and she showed him the way to the mill. She, however, had never once given him a new coat, and he had been obliged to keep on his dirty old smock, which he had brought with him, and which during the 7 years had everywhere become too small for him. When he reached home, the 2 other apprentices were there again as well, and each of them certainly had brought a horse with him. But one of them was a blind one, and the other horse was lame. They asked Hans where his horse was. "It will follow me in 3 days' time." And they laughed and said, "Indeed, stupid Hans, where will you get a horse? It will be a fine one." Hans went into the parlor, but the miller said he should not sit down to table, for he was so ragged and torn that they would all be ashamed of him if anyone came in. So they gave him a mouthful of food outside, and at night when they went to rest, the 2 others would not let him have a bed. And at last he was forced to creep into the goose house and lie down on a little hard straw. In the morning when he awoke, the 3 days had passed, and a coach came with 6 horses, and they shone so brightly that it was delightful to see them. And a servant brought a 7th as well, which was for the poor miller's boy. And a magnificent princess alighted from the coach and went into the mill, and this princess was the little tabby cat whom poor Hans had served for 7 years. She asked the miller where the miller's boy and dunce was, and the miller said, "We cannot have him here in the mill, for he is so ragged. He is lying in the goose house." Then the king's daughter said that they were to bring him immediately. So they brought him out, and he had to hold his little smock together to cover himself. The servants unpacked splendid garments and washed him and dressed him, and when that was done, no king could have looked more handsome. Then the maiden desired to see the horses which the other apprentices had brought home with them, and one of them was blind and the other lame. So she ordered the servants to bring the 7th horse, and when the miller saw it, he said that such a horse as that had never, ever entered his yard. "And that is for the 3rd miller's boy," said she. "Then he must have the mill," said the miller. But the king's daughter said that the horse was there, and that he was to keep his mill as well. And she took her faithful Hans and set him in the coach and drove away with him. They first drove to the little house which he had built with the silver tools. And behold, it was a great castle, and everything inside it was made of silver and gold. And then she married him, and he was rich, so rich that he had enough for all the rest of his life. After this, let no one ever say that anyone is silly, can never become a person of importance. Okay. Okay. The Old Woman in the Wood. A poor servant girl was once traveling with the family with which she was in service through a great forest, and when they were in the midst of it, robbers came out of the thicket and murdered all they found. All perished together except the girl, who had jumped out of the carriage in a fright and hidden herself behind a tree. When the robbers had gone away with their booty, she came out and beheld the great disaster. And then she began to weep bitterly and said, "What can a poor girl like me do now? I don't even know how to get out of the forest. No human being lives in it, so I must certainly starve." She walked about and looked for a road, but could find none. When it was evening, she seated herself under a tree, gave herself into God's keeping, and resolved to sit waiting there and not go away, and let happen what might. When she had sat there for a while, a white dove came flying to her with a little golden key in his beak. It put the little key into her hand and said, "Do you see that great tree? Therein is a little lock. Open it with the tiny key, and you will find food enough and suffer no more hunger." Then she went to the tree and opened it, and found milk in a little dish and white bread to break into it, so that she could eat her fill. When she was satisfied, she said, "It is now the time when the hens at home go to roost. I am so tired I could go to bed too." Then the dove flew to her again and brought another golden key in its bill and said, "Open that tree there. You will find a bed." And so she opened it and found a beautiful white bed, and she prayed God to protect her during the night, and lay down and slept. In the morning the dove came for the third time and again brought a little key and said, "Open that tree there and you will find clothes." And when she opened it, she found garments beset with gold and with jewels more splendid than those of any king's daughter. So she lived there for some time, and the dove came every day and provided her with all she needed. And it was quite a good life. Then one day the dove came and said, "Will you do something for my sake?" "With all my heart," said the girl. Then said the little dove, "I will guide you to a small house. Enter it, and inside it an old woman will be sitting by the fire and will say 'Good day,' but on your life give her no answer. Let her do what she will, but pass by her on the right side. Further on there is a door, which, open, you will enter into a room where a quantity of rings of all kinds are lying amongst, which are some magnificent ones with shining stones. Leave them, however, where they are, and seek out a plain one. which must likewise be amongst them, and bring it to me here as quickly as you can." The girl went to the little house and came to the door. There sat an old woman who stared when she saw her. "Good day, my child." The girl gave her no answer and opened the door. "Whither away?" cried the old woman, and seized her by the gown and wanted to hold her fast, saying, "This is my house. No one can go in there if I choose not to allow it." But the girl was silent and got away from her and went straight into the room. Now there lay on the table an enormous quantity of rings, which gleamed and glittered before her eyes. She turned them over and looked for the plain one, but could not find it. While she was seeking, she saw the old woman and how she was stealing away and wanting to go off with a bird cage which she held in her hand. So she went after her, and she took the cage out of her hand. And when she raised it up and looked into it, a bird was inside, which had the plain ring in its bill. So she took the ring and ran quite joyously home with it, and thought the little white dove would come and get the ring, but it did not. Then she leaned against a tree, determined to wait for the dove. As she thus stood, it seemed just as if the tree was soft and pliant and was letting its branches down. Suddenly the branches twined around her and were two arms, and when she looked around, the tree was a handsome man who embraced and kissed her heartily and said, "You have delivered me from the power of the old woman, who is a wicked witch. She had changed me into a tree, and every day for 2 hours I was a white dove, and so long as she possessed this ring, I could not regain my human form." Then his servants and his horses, who had likewise been changed into trees, were freed from the enchantment also, and stood beside him. And he led them forth to his kingdom, for he was a king's son. And they married and lived happily ever after. One of the themes that I see in these fairy tales are things happen in the forests. A lot of stuff goes on in the forest. Okay, one more. And this one is called The Star Money. The Star Money. And it does have a picture, and I'll show you. There was once upon a time a little girl whose father and mother were dead, and she was so poor that she no longer had a room to live in or bed to sleep in, and at last she had nothing else but the clothes she was wearing and a little bit of bread in her hand which some charitable soul had given her. She was good and pious, however, and as she was thus forsaken by all the world, she went forth into the open country, trusting in the good God. Then a poor man met her who said, "Oh, give me something to eat. I am so hungry." She handed him the whole of her piece of bread and said, "May God bless you," and went onwards. Then came a child who moaned and said, "My head is so cold. Give me something to cover it with." So she took off her hood and gave it to him. And when she had walked a little farther, she met another child who had no jacket and was frozen with cold. So she gave it her own. And a little farther on One begged for a frock, and she gave that away also. At length she got into a forest, and it had already become dark. And there came yet another child, and asked for a shirt. And the good little girl thought to herself, "It is dark night, no one sees you. You can very well give your shirt away." And so she took it off, and she gave that away too. And so as she stood and had not one single thing left, suddenly some stars from heaven fell down, and they were nothing else but hard, smooth pieces of money. And although she had just given her shirt away, she had a new one which was of the very finest linen. And then she put the money into it and was rich all the days of her life. You know, there are so many in here. I mean, look at this. This is a lot to choose from. But I would be doing a Friday flip and reading for about 4 years to get through this. So I'll stop here. Again, I would encourage you to get some of these fairy tales, the real ones, the original ones, for the kids in your life that you read to. I remember my parents reading to us, and I loved that good prevailed. And maybe that's what made me an optimist, because I think at the core of things, I am an optimist. I believe that good prevails, that good does win. Yeah, hard things happen. We all know that. But I think in the end, good prevails. And I think the more we remember that, the more we remind ourselves of that, the better we feel. And I think when you look for something, when you expect it, you have a way of attracting it. So, something to think about. Okay, I'm going to sign off. I hope you enjoyed this little Friday flip of a few Grimm's fairy tales. I appreciate you. I wish you well, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Goodbye for now.